At first glance, the Johnson family seemed like the epitome of the American dream. Thomas, a successful businessman, had worked tirelessly to provide for his wife, Amanda, and their two daughters, Lily and Emma. Their home was nestled in a quiet, suburban neighborhood surrounded by well-kept lawns and friendly neighbors. From the outside, everything appeared perfect, almost too perfect. Thomas was proud of his family. He often bragged to friends and colleagues about how fortunate he was to have such a beautiful, well-rounded wife and two daughters who seemed to have the world ahead of them. Amanda, his wife, had always been a picture of grace and poise. She was the ideal homemaker, maintaining the house with care and ensuring that dinner was always on the table when Thomas came home from work. She was active in the community, often volunteering for local charity events and taking care of their daughter's needs. To Thomas, Amanda was his anchor, the person he could rely on. Their relationship seemed unbreakable, built on years of shared experiences and mutual respect. He could not have imagined a life without her. Their two daughters, Lily and Emma, were equally impressive. Lily, the older of the two, was an exceptional student, focused, determined, and always at the top of her class. She had a natural talent for sports and music, and her future seemed bright. Emma, the younger daughter, was more quiet and reserved, but had a gentle heart. She excelled in art and was often the one to bring a smile to everyone's face with her quirky sense of humor. The family dynamic was one of harmony, with everyone supporting one another in their endeavors. It seemed like a model family, every parent's dream. Thomas often joked with Amanda about how lucky they were to have such a perfect life. He'd say that their only problem was trying to figure out how to keep up with their daughter's endless list of activities. But the truth was, he felt secure in the life they had built. He had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. Despite their outward appearance, the cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Thomas, busy with work, didn't notice the subtle changes in Amanda's behavior. She had become more secretive, spending late nights on the computer and making phone calls that she quickly ended when he entered the room. She was always quick to assure him that everything was fine, but her excuses started to feel less convincing. Still, Thomas was so caught up in his own world that he brushed off these small concerns. He trusted Amanda implicitly and couldn't imagine that she was capable of anything that would disrupt their perfect life. As for Lily and Emma, their lives were becoming more complicated as they got older. They began to spend more time away from home, hanging out with friends, or attending events without much explanation. Amanda, always the protective mother, tried to keep a close eye on them, but as they grew more independent, her influence started to wane. It was around this time that Thomas began to notice Amanda's increasing tension. She would often snap at him over small things, or retreat into silence when they were alone together. Still, Thomas chose to ignore these signs, convinced that it was just the stress of raising two growing children and managing their busy lives. The truth, however, was far darker than Thomas could have ever imagined. Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect family, Amanda had been hiding a dangerous secret, a secret that would slowly unravel the life Thomas thought he knew. The perfect family facade was beginning to crumble, but Thomas was unaware that the woman he loved, the daughters he trusted, were all involved in a web of deception that would soon change everything. What began as small signs of unease would ultimately lead Thomas down a path he was not prepared to travel. A path where his wife's secret would not only destroy their family, but would pull his daughters into a web of criminal activity that would shatter their world forever. Thomas's world began to unravel when an unexpected event shook him to his core. It all started one afternoon when he received a mysterious phone call at work. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, and the tone was serious. The caller simply said, "I think you should know about your wife." It was vague, unsettling, and left Thomas with more questions than answers. The caller, though, insisted on remaining anonymous, but his words planted a seed of doubt in Thomas's mind. At first, Thomas tried to brush off the conversation. He rationalized that it was probably someone with a vendetta or a baseless rumor. But as the days passed, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. He began noticing small things about Amanda that seemed out of place. Her late nights, the strange phone calls she would take in private, and her increasing distance from him became hard to ignore. Though he trusted her completely, the seeds of suspicion had already been planted. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, Thomas decided to confront his growing unease. He wasn't usually one to snoop, but the fear that something wasn't right consumed him. Amanda was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, seemingly lost in thought. Thomas asked her about the phone call he had received, trying to sound casual, but Amanda grew tense. She quickly brushed it off, telling him that it was just a prank or someone trying to cause trouble. She smiled and reassured him that everything was fine. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, as he lay in bed, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the situation than Amanda was letting on. His mind raced with possibilities. Was she having an affair? Was there something illegal going on? The questions kept him awake long into the night. He decided that he had to find out the truth for himself. The next day, while Amanda was out running errands, Thomas took the opportunity to look through some of her things. He knew it was a breach of trust, but the nagging suspicion had grown too strong. What he found stunned him. Hidden among a stack of old bills and paperwork was a set of bank statements. Thomas's eyes widened as he skimmed through them. Large sums of money were being transferred into an account in Amanda's name. Money that couldn't be explained by her normal income. There were also withdrawals that raised questions. The transactions seemed odd, with irregular amounts and businesses that Thomas didn't recognize. A feeling of dread settled in the pit of his stomach as he realized that something was terribly wrong. His hands shook as he continued to go through the papers. There were emails too, some from people Thomas didn't know, discussing arrangements that seemed suspicious. The more he dug, the more he found. A pattern of financial transactions that didn't make sense, a network of people involved, and an operation that seemed far too elaborate to be accidental. At first, Thomas thought he had uncovered some kind of financial mismanagement or a series of small mistakes. But as he pieced together the evidence, the truth became undeniable. Amanda had been hiding a secret life, one that involved fraud, money laundering, and potentially criminal activity. The sheer scope of what he was uncovering left him reeling. But it wasn't just the financial records that alarmed him. There were messages too. Text messages between Amanda and several unknown individuals, many of which seemed to be discussing shady deals and transactions. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that his wife had been living a double life, and he was just starting to peel back the layers of her deception. What hit Thomas the hardest, though, were the names he recognized among the messages. One of them was Lily, his oldest daughter. It seemed like she had been involved in some way, participating in the operation Amanda had been running. His mind couldn't process it at first. His daughter, his precious Lily, was a part of this. Dark world. The shock was almost too much to bear. Thomas's emotions swirled. Betrayal, anger, confusion. He had trusted Amanda completely, And now he realized that everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie. His world, once filled with love and security, was now crumbling around him. But the most painful part of it all was knowing that his daughters, the children he had raised with love and care, were unknowingly being pulled into the same dangerous web. The truth was more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. As Thomas grappled with the overwhelming discovery about Amanda's secret life, he couldn't bring himself to confront her just yet. He needed more answers. The evidence he had uncovered was damning, but there were still too many questions left unanswered. Thomas became obsessed with finding out just how deep Amanda's deceit ran, and what role Lily and Emma played in all of it. He spent the next few days in a haze of investigation, sneaking around the house, checking Amanda's emails, and digging through anything he could get his hands on. It was like a dark puzzle that he had no choice but to solve. The more he looked, the more he realized that the criminal operation Amanda was involved in wasn't just some isolated incident. It was a carefully orchestrated network that spanned several cities. Amanda had been laundering money through multiple businesses she had set up under fake names, and everything had been concealed behind a perfect facade of charity work and social goodwill. The shock deepened when Thomas stumbled upon more troubling information: his daughters. It wasn't just Lily. Emma, too, had been drawn into this web. At first, the involvement seemed minimal. Small tasks like making phone calls or running errands. But as Thomas pieced together the timeline, it became clear that the girls had been used to further Amanda's schemes for years. They had helped her launder money, unknowingly participating in fraudulent transactions, all under the guise of innocent family activities. Thomas remembered the late nights when Amanda had been glued to her computer, the times when Lily would leave the house without explanation, and the way Emma had become more distant and withdrawn. It all made sense now. Amanda had been grooming them for a life of crime, manipulating them into helping her without them even realizing the full scope of what they were doing. At first, they were simply being used for their naivety. But as time went on, Amanda had trained them, perhaps without even realizing, to become more than just passive participants. They were becoming accomplices. The realization hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. His daughters weren't just innocent bystanders. They had been complicit in their mother's illegal activities. And it wasn't just one isolated event. The girls had become embroiled in multiple layers of the scheme, helping to cover up the trail of money that flowed through the various fronts Amanda had set up. What broke Thomas's heart the most was that Lily and Emma had no idea what they were truly a part of. They had been manipulated by Amanda's charm and persuasive tactics, just like he had been. She had used the guise of family loyalty, promising them a better future, a life of security and wealth, all while pulling them deeper into the criminal world. But as Thomas discovered more, he realized that the manipulation went even further than that. Amanda had made the girls believe that they were doing something noble, that their actions were for the greater good of the family. She had promised them wealth and success, telling them that these small crimes were just stepping stones to something bigger. As they got older, she had started to involve them in larger operations, tasks that required more subtlety and deceit. Lily, in particular, had been given responsibilities that involved interacting with shady individuals, while Emma had been tasked with managing accounts and making key transactions. They thought they were helping their mother with small favors. In reality, they were participating in a criminal empire. But there was something darker at play. As Thomas continued to investigate, he discovered that Amanda had set up a separate bank account for both Lily and Emma, accounts they weren't even aware of. Money had been funneled into these accounts over the years, and it was clear that Amanda had been preparing them to take over once she had reached her goal. She had been building an empire, and her daughters were her future. It was a chilling realization. Amanda had not only betrayed Thomas, but she had been planning for her daughters to become the next generation of criminals. The more Thomas uncovered, the harder it became for him to process the scale of what he was dealing with. His family, the life he had known, was a carefully crafted illusion, built on lies, manipulation, and crime. He was devastated, torn between his love for his daughters and his growing disgust at what they had become a part of. There was no easy way to confront them, and no way to undo the damage that had been done. Amanda's perfect family facade had been shattered, revealing the darkness that lurked beneath. And now Thomas had to decide how to expose the truth, knowing that doing so would destroy everything he had once held dear. After days of turmoil, Thomas finally made the decision to confront Amanda. The weight of the evidence he had uncovered, the shocking involvement of his daughters, and the realization that everything he had known was a lie became too much to bear. The perfect family, the image they had cultivated for years, was nothing more than a mask, one that had hidden a web of deceit, manipulation, and crime. Thomas's heart was heavy as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation. When Amanda returned home that evening, Thomas was waiting for her in the living room. He had carefully arranged his thoughts, trying to remain calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. As soon as she entered, he could see the shift in her demeanor. She was nervous, her smile just a little too forced, her movements too calculated. She could sense that something was off, but she had no idea that Thomas had already uncovered her darkest secrets. Without any preamble, Thomas laid the evidence out before her, the bank statements, the messages, the emails. He told Amanda that he knew everything. For a moment there was silence. Amanda's face drained of color, and her eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Thomas watched her closely, waiting for her response, but there was no denying the truth that hung in the air. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. She didn't deny anything. Instead, she admitted it all. Her calmness in admitting to the crimes sent a chill through Thomas. It was as if the woman he had loved for so many years had been replaced by someone entirely different. She confessed that she had been living a double life for years, running fraudulent businesses, laundering money, and involving their daughters in the process. The details she revealed were chilling. How she had used her charm and her role as a loving mother to manipulate Lily and Emma into unwittingly participating in the operation. Amanda explained that her actions had been carefully planned, that she had always known she would eventually be caught, but she also claimed that it was all for the family. She had convinced herself that she was securing a better future for all of them, a future of wealth and comfort. She justified the lies, the deceit, and the manipulation by saying that she had been doing it all out of love. As she spoke, Thomas's mind reeled. He couldn't comprehend how the woman he had trusted, the woman who had raised their daughters with him, could be capable of such deception. The love he had for her seemed to disintegrate with each passing word. He felt as though he was speaking to a stranger, not the woman he had shared his life with. But the revelation that cut the deepest was Amanda's confession about the girls. She admitted that she had not only involved them, but had been preparing them to take over the operation when she was gone. Lily and Emma were no longer innocent. They were part of her world now. And Amanda had been grooming them for this life, teaching them to lie, to cover up, and to keep the family's criminal empire intact. She claimed it was a necessary step for their future. She had promised them that one day they would inherit everything she had built. The betrayal hit Thomas harder than anything else. His daughters, the two people he loved more than anything in the world, had become accomplices in a life of crime, all under the guidance of the woman he trusted. Amanda had not only betrayed him, but had also stolen his daughters' innocence, shaping them into something he couldn't recognize. With every word Amanda spoke, Thomas felt the weight of their shattered family pressing down on him. The dreams they had shared, the life they had built together, seemed like distant memories now. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, he was paralyzed by a feeling of helplessness. What could he do now? How could he possibly salvage anything from this wreckage? But Amanda's confession wasn't the only twist. As she spoke, she made one final revelation that shook Thomas to his core. She had known all along that this moment would come. She had been preparing for it, knowing that eventually Thomas would discover the truth. But she didn't regret her actions. In her mind, everything she had done was justified. And worst of all, she had prepared Lily and Emma for this too. They had been raised to believe that their actions, no matter how illegal, were justified because it was all for the family. In the end, they were all bound together in this web of lies, and Amanda had no intention of ever letting them go. The gravity of the situation sank in, leaving Thomas feeling more isolated than ever. The truth had come out, but it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. His family, his daughters, had been consumed by a darkness he could never have imagined. And as the conversation ended, Amanda's cold demeanor remained. She had no remorse, no regret, only a twisted sense of pride in what she had done. For Thomas, that was the final betrayal. The woman he had loved, the family he had worked so hard to protect, was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever repair the damage that had been done. The days following the confrontation were a blur for Thomas. His mind could barely process the enormity of what had just happened. His world had crumbled, and he was left in the ruins of a life he had once thought to be perfect. Amanda's confession was a brutal wake-up call, but it was the involvement of Lily and Emma that weighed most heavily on his heart. How had things gone so terribly wrong? He had always believed in the goodness of his family, but now it felt as though everything he held dear had been built on lies. For the first time in years, Thomas felt completely alone. The house, once a home filled with laughter and love, now felt like a cold, empty shell. Amanda went about her days with an unsettling calmness, her guilt seemingly absent. She had never been remorseful, and that in itself was more unsettling than anything else. It became clear that Amanda had made peace with her actions. She had no intention of stopping or changing her ways. To her, everything was justified, and she viewed her criminal empire as her legacy. But it wasn't just Amanda who had shattered Thomas's world. It was Lily and Emma. His daughters, the girls he had raised with so much love and care, had become complicit in this vast network of deceit. The realization was like a knife to his heart. Lily, his brilliant athletic daughter, had been manipulated into a life she never asked for. Emma, so quiet and creative, had been drawn into the shadows of this world, far from the innocent child she had once been. Thomas couldn't bring himself to confront them just yet. The shock of the situation left him emotionally paralyzed. How could he have missed the signs? How could he have been so blind? It was a constant, gnawing question that haunted him. And yet, He knew there was no easy answer. Amanda had carefully cultivated a life of secrecy, weaving lies and manipulation into every aspect of their family. The bond he had shared with his daughters had been slowly poisoned without him even realizing it. Days turned into weeks, and Thomas found himself sinking deeper into despair. The weight of the betrayal was unbearable. His every conversation with Amanda felt strained, and the rare interactions with Lily and Emma were awkward and filled with tension. They seemed distant, as though they were living in a world of their own, a world that Thomas was no longer a part of. The love he once had for his daughters now felt clouded by the knowledge of their involvement in Amanda's schemes. One evening, as Thomas sat alone in the living room, a realization hit him with brutal clarity. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the damage Amanda had caused or the darkness that had crept into his family. But there was still one thing he could do. He could try to salvage what was left of his relationship with Lily and Emma. He wasn't ready to give up on them, not entirely. Despite their involvement in Amanda's criminal activities, they were still his daughters, and he couldn't turn his back on them completely. With a heavy heart, Thomas made the decision to reach out to his daughters. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew that it might not lead to the resolution he hoped for, but he had to try. His first step was to speak with Lily. He asked her to meet him in the park, away from the house, where they could talk privately. He had no idea what to expect. Would she deny everything? Would she blame him for not seeing it sooner? Or would she finally admit to the truth? When they met, Lily's face was unreadable, her eyes guarded. She sat across from him, her posture tense. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Thomas didn't know how to start the conversation, but he knew he had to try. He spoke to her about the things he had discovered, the lies, the manipulation, and how he felt betrayed. Not just by Amanda, but by her too. He asked her why she had gotten involved in something so dangerous, so dark. He didn't lecture her. He simply asked, hoping that somewhere deep down she still remembered the person he had raised her to be. To his surprise, Lily's eyes welled up with tears. She admitted that she had never wanted to be a part of it. She had been caught in Amanda's web, just like Thomas. She had trusted her mother, believed that everything Amanda had said was for their family's future. But now, seeing the devastation it had caused, she realized how wrong it all was. She was ashamed, deeply ashamed, and she didn't know how to fix it. She apologized, but her apology felt hollow, like a small step toward the long road of redemption that lay ahead. After their conversation, Thomas was left with a sense of cautious hope. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. He knew the road to healing would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of possibility. He wasn't ready to give up on his daughters, and maybe, just maybe, they weren't too far gone to find their way back. The next step was Emma, but that conversation too would have to wait. For now, Thomas had to process everything. His family had been shattered, but the smallest spark of hope remained, hope that his daughters could find their way out of the darkness that Amanda had trapped them in. It wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter.